the time. It is a delight for me to introduce Professor Abdullah Baabood, who is currently visiting professor at Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. And he has previously held the position of Director of Gulf Studies at Qatar University, and also the Director of the Gulf Research Center at the University of Cambridge University. I've had the pleasure of knowing Abdullah for a number of years. I think I met Abdullah, I think I met you first when I visited Cambridge for one of those Gulf research retreats. And then we have stayed in touch. When Abdullah was the Director of Gulf Research Center at Qatar University, we signed an MOU between Deakin and Qatar to facilitate our research partnership. And it was very fortunate for me to be able to host Abdullah a few years back in Australia for another talk. Now we just have to suffice to this digital online get together. That's the best we can do. Hopefully we can meet again in person and share stories and hugs and kisses. Today's topic, of course, is quite pertinent. We're looking at how COVID-19 is affecting the region. There have been so many news of at one point, Iran seemed to be the epicenter of COVID-19 and a source of danger and threat to the region. Now, I think that epicenter has moved to Turkey. Again, quite concerning. So that has clear implications for the way states in the region behave, they relate to each other. Some of the assumptions and negativities might be accentuated, others might have been overcome. So in order for us to really make sense of what's going on in the Persian Gulf region, GCC region, we have the right expert to talk to us about the dynamics. We are going to have about 20 minutes odd of presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. There is a function, I'm sure you'll be more familiar with Zoom than I am, but there will be a function for raising hands. So if you raise your hand, it will show us the order of people raising hands for questions. If that doesn't work, you might use...
Someone test that maybe. Can someone try raising their hand?
No, there's a function, Hanley.
Oh, shoot, Hanley.
I saw you raising a hand physically, Hanley, but we wanted to raise your hand digitally on Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Jesse.
Okay, Jesse's done it. Hi, Jesse. So hopefully
could you maybe tell us where it is, Shahram? Because I have no idea, just in case so people know.
Dara, do you know where it is? I don't actually see it.
Over on the right there somewhere. I can't see it right now because I'm a host. Jesse, maybe could you explain it? I unmute you.
Sorry, you go to participants.
It's
you click
participants.
Click on participants.
Under participants, you go all the way down. At the bottom, there are the hand side, the
left side.
Yeah, to the left side.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll work it out. But I like to, ideally, I like to allow everyone to have an opportunity to share their views and ask their questions rather than typing their questions. It's the first time we're doing this, so it's a bit of an experiment. Let's see how we manage. With that very long introduction, Abdullah, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Shahram, for this kind invitation. Thank you, Dara, as well for this. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be with you again, this time virtually. And thank you for all those who joined us in the meeting. I don't know if I say good morning, good afternoon, good day to you all. It's a testing time for all of us and for technology as well, and also for the region. Shahram asked me to do a talk on COVID-19 and regional relations, and he asked me to do a presentation. So I did something quick. the very last minute, and I hope I'll go through it as well. It's not my favorite to actually do PowerPoint presentation, but nevertheless, I can't say no to Shahram when he asks for something like this. Okay, so here we are. We're talking about the GCC, or sorry, the Middle East and North Africa as a troubled region. And here is a map that shows the region. I guess not many of you need to look at it. You understand the map, and you know that this is not just a region that is affected by the Corona crisis, but it's also it's a region in turmoil that has been there for some time. So now I cannot read my stuff here because of the pictures. I don't know how, but anyway, suffice to say that the Middle East or the MENA region is really going through existential crisis. There are many conflicts that spread along sectarian, ethnic, religious fault lines. The region is rife with those kind of conflicts, and neither regional governments or global governance has been able to provide any solution for this region. I don't need to tell you about the region that has its own more than its own fair share of costly conflicts and unnecessary and devastating wars that we are, some of them are still going on until now, from the 70s onwards. And we have just barely avoided one in January when the US killed Qasem Soleimani, and there was kind of a showdown between the US and Iran. Amongst all of this, the region is also kind of facing other issues like global warming, demographic, social, economic, failed states and failing states, and a number of spiraling conflicts that are beyond management. And how we are facing, the region is now facing today twin threats, basically the outbreak of the virus in the region and the fall in the oil price. The two of them make a devastating economic and humanitarian crisis for the region. Now, just to give you quotes from what the Red Cross had said, basically it says that the outbreak across the Middle East threatens to shatter lives, millions of already destitute people in conflict zones, and could have devastating economic upheavals. I cannot read half of my presentations because of the way that the system is. So do excuse me if I don't read everything. So the same, the Red Cross also called for the authorities to prepare for what is called potentially devastating aftermath and socio-economic earthquake. It also said this is kind of, the worst disaster, worse than the epidemic itself is worse than the disease itself, because of the top of the conflict, the top of the violence, they will have to deal with socio-economic consequences of the pandemic, which is quite scary. Already millions lack healthcare, food, water, electricity, and where prices are rising and infrastructure is damaged in the region. And as you know, millions are internally displaced, and many are especially vulnerable in the whole region. So, Iran announced its first coronavirus case in February 19th. And so far, it's been the worst hit country, and it's become the epicenter until I think Turkey has taken place, as you mentioned, Shahram. And Iran is facing devastating humanitarian consequences because of U.S. maximum pressure, crippling sanctions, secondary sanctions on Iran have impeded the flow of urgently needed medical equipment and humanitarian assistance into the region. So in February, late February, other GCC states announced their first cases. And it just happened that these cases were amongst citizens, GCC citizens who returned from pilgrimage to Iran, which in some sense risked exacerbating communal division and sectarian division. And given the current hostilities between Iran and some of the GCC states, this has increased acrimony as well as elevated the suspicion of the Shia community. So how did the GCC states reacted to this? Well, Qatar, Qatar's Emir ordered dispatch of 6 tons of medical equipment and supplies. And I think that has also been increased, and Kuwait has also offered $10 million to help with the crisis in Iran. In one sense, the most important country here is in the region is Saudi Arabia, which is kind of locked into regional rivalry with Iran. It accused Iran of bearing responsibility for the spread of the virus and for its failure to stamp passports of Saudi visitors. Actually, Iran doesn't stamp passports for any visitors because of the sanctions, and because that if you visited Iran, you could have some trouble in other countries, so they don't stamp passports anyway. Saudi was quick to quarantine the mostly Shia region where the cases initially started, but didn't escalate so much. The Shia citizens who returned from what was considered illegal to visit Iran were pardoned as long as they acknowledged that they were their visit and they went under quarantine. Of course, Saudi Arabia is a vocal proponent of the US maximum pressure campaign, and it wants to kind of pressurize Iran to discontinue its support for supporting its allies across the region, in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, in Yemen, and has accused Iran of being irresponsible for spreading the virus. It also, Saudi Arabia formally opposed any lifting of the blockade that was asked by the non-aligned movement, which of course prevented crucial aid supplies reaching the Islamic Republic to alleviate the crisis. Bahrain, again, had a lot of visitors to Iran because of largely Shia community lives there, and they claim that Iran has their action has amounted to biological aggression. And many Bahrainis were actually stuck in Iran, and there was a big issue. Some of them were not able to return because there were no direct relations between the two countries, between Bahrain and Iran. And some of them ended up in Oman, and others went to Qatar, and there were even a rift between Qatar and Bahrain over how to bring these Bahrainis back to Bahrain. So, there was, Bahrain is along the side of Saudi Arabia, has been against Iran and has not been helpful in this regard. What is interesting here is the position of the United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates is, of course, an ally of Saudi Arabia and a good friend, and normally follows the policies of the Saudi government. But what is really interesting is that it sent its military aircrafts to deliver aid to the Iranian government, and tons of assistance has been sent, and medical experts were also sent from the World Health Organization through the Emirati. And the UAE Minister of State for International Cooperation expressed distress at this, and he called for the leadership of both countries to stand shoulder to shoulder at the time of need, which is quite interesting to see that. The gesture itself illustrates that there is political intent to use COVID to help ease the regional tension. Iran responded to this gesture with Stoke and said that this is more reason logical to the relationship to develop. And what is interesting as well is that the Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif and the Minister of UAE, Abdullah bin Zayed, had actually a phone call to discuss ways to contain the pandemic. Another interesting development of UAE is a call that happened between the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed and President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, where the former offered Syria to cope with help to cope with the virus outbreak. It's interesting because this is, the first publicized contact between an Arab leader and Assad, who is considered to be Iranian regional ally. And in this sense, one questions, is the UAE showing independent course from Saudi Arabia and maybe even from the United States, while at the same time continuing to stress its close security relations with both. This is not the first time that this has happened. There has been a call and a contact earlier on, but this is quite interesting to follow. And this is also more interesting that, following the decision of the Emiratis to withdraw from Yemen, does this really distinguish the UAE from the Saudi position? I think we can't go without saying a few things about the US, because it is, although it's a global power, it's also a regional power. And the US, of course, has policy has a lot to say about how the countries in the region conduct their relationship, whether it's policy towards Iran or its relationship with the other GCC states. It's interesting that Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, had held the possibility of cooperation, and he said that that the Trump administration might consider easing sanctions to fight the pandemic. However, it didn't give any concrete plans of how to do so. Does the comment reflect a shift by the U.S. Department? It's not clear because right after that there was a flurry of phone calls last Thursday, in fact, between Pompeo and his counterparts in the region, especially Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, to discuss Iran and the COVID-19 pandemic. And he did say that he discussed Iran's destabilizing behavior, which means that perhaps the talk between them wasn't that positive, and maybe trying to kind of raise concern to these countries of their approach to Iran and trying to help Iran in this situation. Things can get better. President Trump, as you would expect, tweeted early yesterday that he's directed his Navy to fire upon Iranian gunboats that harass US ships, which might even raise tension or more tension in the region. And he said, I have instructed the United States Navy to shoot down any Iranian gunboat if they harass any of our ships at sea, which is an interesting development to watch in the next few days, weeks, months in the region. Now, I would conclude by saying that COVID-19 outbreak has actually created enormous health and economic challenges, and it still is. And the challenges to the region are huge. But also it has opened a new diplomatic opportunities that could be used usefully if this was to continue. So by engaging in bilateral human diplomacy between some of the Gulf states, with Iran especially, and maybe in other countries in the region, Turkey, etc., could help the situation. While the immediate results of these initiatives, or humanitarian initiatives, or humanitarian diplomacy, if you like, is limited, and it's gradual and it's slow. It can be seen as a groundwork for political overtures and confidence-building measures between these countries that could lead to some easing of tension. However, what is really worrying is that there is an absence of coordinated GCC multilateral response to the regional crisis, not only between the GCC state themselves, but between the GCC and its immediate region. Knowing that that the situation is that these epidemics, on these challenges that are faced by one country do not sometimes have respect to borders and to national boundaries, and that they all live in the same region and they're all facing the same kind of challenges. And maybe if this is recognized by the leaders in the region, this could be a great time for some kind of a rapprochement, which Iran has been calling for, and calling for a talk with between them and the GCC states. And hopefully that some of these overtures will kind of prepare the groundwork for that, maybe hopefully sooner than later. But let's hope for the best. And with that, I thank you very much. I hope I made it within 20 minutes.
You did an amazing job, Abdullah. I am so impressed, keeping so well to the time. It's a well-honed skill with you, Abdullah. You have done so many of these talks. You know exactly how to time yourself. So you've raised quite a number of points for us to think about. The floor is open. Let's see if our system of raising hand works. First question. Oh, okay. Dara, do you see the hands? I see just.
So Zahid is your first question.
There you go.
I've unmuted you, Zahid.
Okay. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Abdullah Baabood. It's a pleasure listening to you as always. So I have two questions. One is in relation to China's, humanitarian aid and all the public diplomacy in the aftermath of what happened in Wuhan, and whether this, in terms of geopolitics, is going to transform the role of the U.S., especially in the Gulf region or in the Middle East or the MENA region. And the second question, you talked about at the end of your talk about GCCs, perhaps, some kind of intervention in the health area. How viable do you think that would be when there is still, GCC Qatar crisis? We still have that on, ongoing. So just two questions. Thank you.
Shahram, do you want me to answer each question at a time, or do you want to take a few questions and then try and answer them? It's up to you.
Let's try and respond to this question.
Right. Thank you, Zahid. It's a pleasure to meet you online this time. Yes, I think it's interesting to see what is happening during this crisis. And I concentrated my talk about Iran, but you know, there are other regional countries that one can talk about, you know, Iraq, Yemen, Turkey, etc. And Egypt is something to watch. And of course, Palestinian territories. You know, the challenges are huge, but what is interesting that you in your question is you asked about the role of China, and the GCC states themselves were very quick in responding to the outbreak of the virus in China. And a number of these countries have actually kind of stood with China and sent you know, support and humanitarian support to China. Obviously, because you know of the growing economic interest between China and the Middle East in general, and the Gulf in particular, where there is now, you know, the Gulf states in particular rely on China economy and China market for their sale of their oil. And therefore, they were quite quick in responding to the outbreak in China. Equally, China did the same thing. China responded very quickly to the outbreak in the region, whether it's in Iran or the other Gulf states, including Oman, for example, and it sent medical supplies, etc. So that what this actually shows is that you know, the kind of the warmth of the relationship and the more strategic relationship that is building between China and the region at large. Despite the fact that the GCC states in Iran and China don't see eye to eye on a number of things, including you know, their policy towards Iran, for example, but you know, the relationship is generally warm and it's getting much more strategic and much more deeper. With the United States, there was hardly any support that I come across, and it's interesting that the GCC states to show their own public that they are doing a good job internally. They are making examples of Europe and the United States of how badly they have managed this situation. So while they're talking kind of nicely about China and its management and the way that it handled the crisis, they're kind of inadvertently criticizing Europe and the United States with this. Now, of course, that doesn't, you know, say much as far as, you know, the relationship, the strategic relationship with the United States is always going to be there between the GCC and the United States, despite all the talk of, you know, the United States withdrawing from the region or pivoting to Asia. That is, there may be a change in certain policies, but it's not necessarily going to be a withdrawal or a quick withdrawal that people talk about, and China is not in any kind of sense going to replace the United States in that regard. But the relationship and the kind of the dynamics of this relationship between the GCC states and the United States in one hand and China is quite interesting and interesting to watch. And your second question is, you're absolutely right about, you know, that the fact that there is no concerted efforts regionally, despite the fact that they have the GCC, between the GCC states, despite the fact they've had meetings of the ministers of health, and even in one of those meetings, the Qatari Minister of Health was not allowed to attend the meeting, or they made it technically possible for her, I believe, to attend the meeting. Just shows you that, you know, the diversity of this conflict, that despite all what is going on and despite the challenges that the region is facing economically, in terms of public health, in terms of security that is challenging the region. The conflict, the internal conflict between the Gulf states and themselves is still lingering on, and it's not going to kind of leave us fast. It's interesting that some of the GCC states are opening up to Iran and to Syria, but not to Qatar in this sense. And you would have expected that this will be an opportunity as well, and a safe facing arrangement to kind of overcome this absurd crisis that was that's been going on and kind of hurting the region and hurting the GCC and their collective, if you like, regional integration. One could maybe, the kind of, if you want to be positive about this, I think maybe amongst all the crises that are going on, maybe the Qatar or the Gulf crisis, the internal Gulf crisis, or Qatar crisis, someone call it, may be subdued and may slowly kind of start to, the relationship start to build up without having to, have a signing public relation exercise, which would be another face-saving arrangement. If the leaders were to actually take this opportunity, this would be a great opportunity to do so, because it would mean that no one will lose face, and a more united GCC is good for the whole region, and hopefully this is going to happen. And I think a more united GCC that it's peace with itself and it's peace with its region is also going to be helpful, not only for regional politics, but also for global security and stability.
Thank you. Next question in line.
Ayaha? Sorry, I can only see your username. I've just unmuted you.
Aya.
Aya.
We
Sorry.
met at Kylie Baxter's class.
Oh, lovely to see you again.
So Abdullah, my question for you was about the absence of the GCC multilateral aid response. If all the obstacles to that response were eliminated, what would that response look like?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what is needed. Thank you for that question. I think what is needed is obviously we know that the crisis in this particular case, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, would be that if the GCC were to work together in terms of harmonizing their strategy towards confronting this crisis, there are countries within the GCC that need help from the others as well. For example, Bahrain and Oman, that are more affected than the others, especially economically, given the fall in the oil price. So it would give them an opportunity to kind of draw comprehensive policies within the GCC to confront the crisis and to start opening up slowly to their economies to the region, because the effect in the economy is obviously huge, and it's something that we cannot really even comprehend now, because we don't know how long this crisis is going to continue and what the overall total effect is going to be. But also, if they were to do the same with Iran and the region, the GCC states in a much better place to help that, because what Iran really needs now, more than anything else, is medical supplies and medical help. And given, of course, the sanctions and everything, Iran is struggling to do that. And to have your neighbors suffer when you're, and you know that they are suffering, next door to you, and you've got the wherewithal to be able to help them, it doesn't make any human sense not to step up and overcome, political difficulties to help Iran. And if that was to happen, that could really go a long way in terms of opening up avenues for more cooperation that can lead to overcoming some of the political stalemate that is happening in the region and the conflicts that are ongoing. These conflicts in the region are not going to go away by just keeping at them and having, there is no military solutions to them, as we know. And the only solution is to have some kind of a peaceful arrangement through dialogue, etc. Now, the response to the crisis, to the COVID-19 crisis, could actually go a long way in kind of paving the road towards more reconciliation between the two sides of the Gulf. But certainly, for the time being, what Iran needs is medical help and medical support, because the numbers are increasing, and we don't know if the numbers that have been announced are accurate or not, and we don't know if there is enough testing going on in Iran. It's difficult to tell at this stage, but I think Iran is in a dire need for support, and I think one should leave the political rivalry and political disagreements to one side and help in this case, hoping that this is going to open up the hearts for more better relations between the two sides. Hope I helped with that.
Thank you. Safi, you're up next for the question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Abdullah, for that presentation. My question is a bit about the oil price. So, as you know, the COVID-19 had a significant impact on the global economy, right? But we have a number of rentier states in the region. So, how do you think that the impact of this economic fall will play on the regional cooperation or conflict? And I'm sure you will be talking about this as well, that some states will be cornered, including Iran, as the oil price keeps going down. So how will they react? But I'm sure Iran is not the only one. Saudi Arabia will be definitely impacted. So will be Iraq. So how do you think states in the region will react to this unprecedented fall in oil price? Thank you.
Can I suggest, before we go to your response, Abdullah, can I suggest we take another question, because I see a lot of raised hands, and I want to make sure everyone gets the chance to share their ideas and ask their questions. So Dara, could you please go to the next person in line?
Next is Matthew Gray.
Well, actually, my question follows on a little bit, which is just, I was wanting to ask Abdullah if he could talk a little bit about his homeland, about Oman. Oman seems to me to have sort of some of the problems that the Gulf generically has got, but and some of the risks, but also this sort of current challenge of the transition to a new sultan. Sorry. So I was just sort of wondering if you could talk to that a little bit. It seems to me like the risks of low oil prices just mentioned, and transition, maybe even Oman's sort of unique reliance on tourism and leisure, these sort of things, perhaps they place Oman at a particular risk, or how worried should we be, I suppose, about the medium-term prospects for Oman's stability and for the new sultan?
Do you want me to respond?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you both for the questions. Well, the COVID-19's effects on the region, apart from, of course, the public health effect, are difficult now to kind of measure because, you know, we don't know how long this is going to continue and what things are going to transpire at the end. However, one can understand that, you know, because of COVID, the oil prices have seen a great decline in the price, which is affecting the country, but not just the oil price that is affecting the economies of the country. It's also the whole idea of you know, entertainment and tourism, the you know, pilgrimage, Umrah, and maybe even Hajj, that and tourism within the region, and you know, business, and even Expo, you know, 2020. All of that has been affected, and I think that is, you know, this is going to mount up to a very, very costly affair. And when you take the oil prices, a drop in the oil prices, it's really just going to make a huge challenge to the economic stability of the region. Of course, there are some countries that are better suited than others, and I'll come to talk about Oman. Matthew had brought in, but generally there is going to be a huge cost to the economies of the region. The whole idea of, you know, economic diversification and all of that is and visions that have been proposed in the Gulf states are beautiful to look at and to read, but at the same time, you know, they have not really been able to diversify the economy away from oil, and the region is still very much addicted to oil, and you know, this is not going, diversification is not going to happen in decades. It will take a much longer time to do so, despite all the efforts, and I think this is going to have a very bad knock-on effect because of the COVID crisis. Hopefully, it will make the leaders understand the need to do so, because I think the, you know, oil age is not necessarily ending, but it is certainly not going to be there with us for a very long time, given the challenges to other energy. From other energy sources, including cleaner energy and climate change, etc. So the oil price is going to have a huge knock-on effect on the economies of the region, and it may bring some of the economies down on their knees. And people talk about two countries in particular that are more I'm linking the two questions, if you like, that are more prone to be affected more than others, and that is Bahrain and Oman, because of, you know, the nature of their economies. Oman in particular, and to respond to Matthew's question, Oman in particular has been facing economic challenges even before the COVID-19 and the fall in the oil price. It started since 2014 almost, or since the Arab Springs, when Oman started to employ lots of people in public sector to help offer employment to its population, and to, you know, kind of help grievances of the people and their call for employment, and that has really kind of increased the wage bill for the country. The country has not been able to diversify. We had an ailing monarch, the late Sultan Qaboos, who was difficult for him to kind of manage the country, as he was getting old and ill, and being the father of the nation. No one really wanted to upset him with bad news, and the country has been kind of suffering for a while, economically at least. Now, this, the change that has taken place, and now we have a new sultan, Sultan Haytham, who's much younger and much more enthusiastic and knows the situation, especially that he has been the chairman of the Vision 2040 for Oman. There is a lot of hope that he's going to instill some kind of dynamics in the way that the country is being run, and he's promised to downscale the bureaucracy and bring it back to its normal size, and to make it more efficient and more transparent and accountable. And he promised to indulge and talk to the youth and try and help them and support them and helps education, research. All of these things that he has been saying are great, and people, kind of pinning big hopes on them. However, I don't envy him at the moment. He's been hit with the twin, if you like, effects of the COVID-19 and the slowdown in the economy, and also of the oil prices. So I think the challenges are going to be huge. Oman is already, as you know, it's been downgraded in terms of its debt rating by the debt agencies and debt rating agencies, and it's getting more difficult for them to raise funds again. And they're more and more, they are limited now in terms of where they can get funds from. Now there are people talking about maybe going to the IMF, which is one option, and hopefully we can avoid that. But as you know, I come from Oman, and I feel particular, if you like, well, I have a particular feeling about this, but I think the IMF, if we go to, it could be useful in one sense, because it could actually help Sultan Haytham to implement the reforms that he wanted to do, and he can blame it on the IMF. So that is something that perhaps that could happen. The other option is to get some funds from the region, which of course the region is itself is under pressure financially, and they are themselves going to the debt market as well. But yet they are in a much better position to help than other countries, and Oman could do so. But there is a question mark if this was to happen. What effect is it going to have on the Oman independent foreign policy, and would there be kind of strings attached to any financial help that could come, especially from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates? Kuwait and Qatar are always obvious sources for funds, and I think Oman could tap into that, but I haven't seen anything on that front. But I think that is one other option that they could follow. I have been hearing that maybe the EU and the European Commission is considering doing something. I don't know to what extent this is going to be true, or is it doable at all, because the EU is also facing its own economic problems. But there are calls within the EU, within the Commission, especially from the European Council of Foreign Relations, that are pushing the EU to kind of lend a supporting hand to Oman, not necessarily finance, but also know-how and how to kind of reform or restructure the economy. So there could be opportunities there, but the challenges are huge, and I don't think one can underestimate how much challenges is the country Oman in one hand, but the whole region is facing.
I like your idea, Abdullah. You said that Oman can borrow money from IMF and then blame IMF for all the consequences. So if it works out, it's fantastic. If it doesn't work out, it's IMF. We have time for 2 more questions, I think.
Okay, so the next 2 questions we've got Abbas, and then we've got it's JMDOR. Sorry, I can only see your username.
Perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Abbas. I'm a PhD student at Deakin University. So as you mentioned, there's 2 possible tendencies. One is opportunity for regional cooperation, and second one is kinds of securitization in the region to blame each other countries and then translate that into domestic politics. Maybe it comes from motivation comes from domestic politics, and we see news in the region that defining minorities as a scapegoat in the region, that they are going to Iran, as you mentioned, Saudi Arabia. So how do you see that trend in the region to translate this issue in domestic politics as to replace some minorities as a social impacts of the COVID-19 in the region based on this securitization, which is linked to somehow to regional rivalries in the region?
Sorry, I need to now find the speaker. JM Door, you're up.
And please introduce yourself.
Maybe we've lost them.
Maybe let's go to the next person.
All right, so next in line is Aiden.
Okay.
Did you have a question, Aiden? Oh, he's still muted. Okay.
Do you hear?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My question was about the poverty. And as you know, there is a linear relationship between poverty and the spread of virus. And Abdullah mentioned about the crisis in economic, but seems region require some more diplomacy and diplomatic relationship to address the economic crisis, include poverty. And what do you think about?
And Abdullah, can I please invite you to keep your response succinct, because I see if you raise that, and I haven't asked my own question yet.
Right. Thank you both for your interesting question. I think sectarianism is always going to be there, and I think we should not ignore the fact that you know, these things do kind of linger on for a long time, and it's been there for a while, and it will continue to be there. The question is, you know, how do we overcome that kind of sectarianism, and how to make sure that it doesn't kind of spread off into a conflict. As you know, there in the GCC or the Gulf region, we have different backgrounds, from whether it is religious, but also kind of ethnic backgrounds. We have Persians, we have Arabs, we have Shia, we have Sunnis, we have Abadis, we have people from African descent, we have people from different parts of the world that are residing there, and they are nationals. And I think, you know, there are always going to be this kind of, you know, sectarian views towards the others. And I don't think we can dream to overcome that very quickly. However, and this actually, the COVID-19 has actually demonstrated to a certain extent that what happened was there were some Shia pilgrimage who went to Iran, to the holy places in Qom, and they are the ones who came back with this. And initially there was some kind of anti, if you like, Shia sentiment. However, that actually died down now, and I think the governments are not necessarily kind of trying to stoke this sectarianism issue, because that could also have challenging, if you like, internal problems for them. So what we are seeing now, and I think we need to look at the region. Of course, sectarianism is always going to be there. It's always going to be an issue. Religious differences and beliefs and backgrounds and ethnicity is always going to be an issue. But I think what is really happening in the region is not sectarianism, it's not Shia Sunni, it's not Persian Arab. It is more to do with political rivalry between, you know, Iran on one hand being, you know, a much larger, if you like, country with enormous, interesting history, and a powerful country that wants to have its own role in the region, and Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, sees itself as a contender, and it doesn't want to see Iran as a rival in the region. And I think this is where it really kind of stems down to, is that the fact that there is political, there is like a conflict over political hegemony in the region, and political rivalry between these two, that use sectarianism, that use ethnicity, that use other things, if you like, to fulfill their objectives. Both of them are using it to a certain extent, which is, of course, it's not helpful. I think both countries have to realize that we have to live together in a region, that we cannot change the geography, we cannot change the history, we cannot change the people, and they have to learn how to kind of cooperate together. And I think I will just jump very quickly, because I know Shahram is looking at me, to the idea of poverty. Poverty is widespread in the region, even within the rich Gulf states, believe it or not. And if you look around you, the Gulf states themselves could be seen as islands of prosperity and wealth, etc., but they are floating in a very rough sea of hungry and angry people around them. You look around you, and there are poverty everywhere, in Iraq, in Iran, Yemen, in Syria, in Horn of Africa, Egypt, and even within the GCC states. So unless we tackle this together through cooperation, through more integration within the region, through accepting each other, through dialogue, and joint projects and joint efforts, this is going to continue to haunt us. We can't live in these islands of prosperity while the others around us are suffering. And this is something that the region has to do. And I think Iran has actually called for this kind of relationship. And Oman has also called for this kind of relationship. And I think there are other countries in the region that are calling for more cooperation to overcome this crisis. But this rivalry keeps getting on the way, and and obscuring this kind of time bomb, and that is poverty that is building around. Poverty, creates lots of ills, not just health, but also discontent, and creates jealousy, it creates conflicts, people have nothing to lose, so they can be bought by one side or the other, or they can move on to, from one ideology to the other. So we need to tackle that, and it can only be tackled by more cooperation between regional countries. And I think time has come, and if COVID-19 and this fallen oil prices and this economic situation that are now facing the whole region, if they cannot grow up, and if they cannot face it collectively, I don't think there will come another moment that they could do so. I think enough is enough. We have tried wars, we have tried conflicts, we've tried proxies, we've tried everything. Nothing has worked, and nothing will work. History will tell us that Europe has only managed to do so when they started to cooperate and they started to work with each other. They had poverty, they had sectarianism, they had religious conflicts, they had ethnic conflict, and look what they have achieved now through more regional cooperation. This is something we need to learn. There are also lessons in Asia that we have to learn from, and we have to learn how to coexist and accept our differences and accept our, if you like, backgrounds, etc., and ethnicity and sectarian background. But we need to kind of move on to develop a much more cooperative relationship that sees peace and prosperity and security, not just for the region, but for the globe at large. I hope that is.
I think with that, with those arousing words of optimism and humanity, we need to stop this session. I do see that there are a number of hands raised. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to give you an opportunity to raise your questions, but we will be holding other events. Among them, you might be interested to know, among them is our our next webinar with Dr. Rehan Ismail from ANU, who will be talking to us on mobilizing Salafism against jihadism. I don't know if you see my screen there. She will be talking to us on 13th of May. So perhaps you can join us if you're free, if you can manage the time. But for now, I'd like to thank Professor Abdullah Baabood for sharing his insights into this really complicated situation in the Gulf. It's quite complicated, but there is hope. And I really love that idea that there is hope in the region. And perhaps against all odds, COVID-19 could provide the catalyst for overcoming sectarianism and rivalries in the region. So thank you very much, Abdullah, for sharing your ideas with us. Dara, would you mind unmuting everyone so that we all give a big clap to Professor Abdullah for his insights? I don't know if the unmute all working. Correct.
Wow.